Good afternoon and welcome to the American Floral Endowment New Grow Pro webinar series. My name is Melissa Munoz. I'm a PhD student from Clemson University and I'm serving as the moderator for today's session on making sense of artificial intelligence in floriculture. On behalf of the endowment, I'm excited to launch the AFE New Grow Pro webinar series that will feature a new topic every month presented by an industry expert. The webinars are free to everyone thanks to the generous support of AFE sponsors. July sessions are sponsored by Mercer Botanicals. Mercer Botanicals grows and supplies high-quality tropical foliage for the wholesale floriculture industry. Mercer sells to all segments of the wholesale buying industry through the continuous United States, excluding Arizona and Canada. If you would like to see all of our sponsors and their sites, or if you are a supplier and are interested in becoming a sponsor for any topic, you can find that information on the AFE website at endowment.org/growpro. You will find the link in the chat. Our presentation has been pre-recorded in English. Dean Kopsell will join us following the presentation to answer questions that you may have. We encourage you to submit your questions through the Q&A feature on the chat. Questions can be submitted both in English and Spanish, and I can translate when needed. We will answer as many of your questions live as we can before the end of the hour. Any unanswered questions may be answered through a separate email exchange following this presentation. This session is being recorded and will be shared to the AFE YouTube account. Through YouTube's accessibility features, you will be able to access closed caption in other languages. Without further ado, I would like to present today's speaker, Dean Kopsell, Professor and Chair of the Environmental Horticulture Department at the University of Florida. Dean started his position as Professor and Chair of the Environmental Horticulture Department at the University of Florida in 2017. Dr. Kopsell received a Bachelor of Science degree in agribusiness horticulture from Illinois State University. He received his master's degree and his PhD from the Horticulture Department at the University of Georgia. Dr. Kopsell was an assistant professor in the plant biology department at the University of New Hampshire from 2000 to 2004. Prior coming to Florida, Dr. Kopsell was a faculty member in the plant science department at the University of Tennessee. Dr. Kopsell's publication records include 123 scientific journal articles and 6 book chapters. He has most recently co-authored an online textbook entitled Horticulture, Principles, Practices, and Career Opportunities with his brother Dave, published by Great River Learning. He specializes in the areas of plant nutrition, control environment, and plant improvement of specialty horticultural crops. Dean, welcome and thank you for presenting today on making sense of artificial intelligence in floriculture.
Well, welcome everybody to the Grow Pro webinar series. My name is Dean Kopsell and I am the chair of the Environmental Horticulture Department at the University of Florida. And today I'd like to talk to you about some of the very exciting applications of artificial intelligence in horticulture and specifically the floriculture industry. If you've heard of artificial intelligence, you may have some preconceived notions about what that actually means. And when we think about the modern definition of artificial intelligence, it kind of goes much more beyond these smart machines that can actually perform tasks in replace of human intelligence. And I know we probably all think of robotics when we think of artificial intelligence, but what it is really doing, it's rapidly becoming an interdisciplinary science with multiple approaches. So if you can think of engineering, you can think of applications, but you can also think of rapid data analysis and computer science that are all going to contribute to this new and emerging field of artificial intelligence. And really what it's doing, it's creating a paradigm shift across all the different aspects of the business sector or the manufacturing sector, because it's really going to be the application of what we call machine or deep learning. And that's actually using computer algorithms and high throughput computing capabilities to actually predict or make models that will help answer some of the problems or some of the issues that come up in manufacturing, processing, distribution, the whole gamut across that spectrum. We've already been seeing a lot of applications within the agricultural sector for many years. And you can think about GPS and how it's been applied to big time agriculture or row crop agriculture with yield assessments. I know it's already reached the floriculture and greenhouse industry when we actually talk about using things like smart technology for computer control of environmental systems, lighting, irrigation, temperature management, et cetera. So when we think about artificial intelligence, it's really going beyond the things that you would think about as far as robotics, and to actually looking at the scope of bringing in a lot of different aspects across those business sectors. And really what it's going to boil down to is the application of high throughput and big data science and how it can help solve problems within the industry. So as an applied science and an industry, you all know that horticulture is going to actually play a role in the adoption of artificial intelligence as it relates to agricultural productions, within our country and certainly around the world. And some of the things that are developing, and certainly rapid developing, can have almost immediate impacts within the horticulture industry. And some of them, as I described them, are going to take a couple of more years before adoption. But I think as you listen to the rest of this presentation, I want you to kind of get a good idea of how these particular aspects can influence your operations and what it actually could have an impact on the changing dynamics of the workforce that you're going to invite into your operations and who you're actually going to be hiring in the years to come. So this is some information that I pulled off of a website, and it really relates back to how AI is going to impact the greenhouse industry. Now, admittedly, most of these particular topics were related to the food production aspect of it. But really, when we're talking about the adoption, the maturity level of the technology is actually ready. We have rapid computing at our fingertips, on our smartphones, on our iPads, in our operations. So big data science is here for all of us, and it's within reach for all of us. So whether we talk about machine learning or we talk about the rapid adoption of imaging technologies where cameras or computer-aided imaging technologies can actually take rapid images of production areas and make assessments in milliseconds where it would take somebody walking through those operations to make those own judgments. And the application of edge AI, which is really kind of an in-house artificial intelligence using just the information or the data from your particular operation instead of going out and using the World Wide Web or say the Wi-Fi. And the fact that growers within this industry and across the spectrum of horticulture are actually ready for this technology. They're used to the speed, they're used to information that's user-friendly, mobile solutions, using the cloud for data storage, etc. And it's really that big data science that's going to create the potential for all these solutions. And when we talk about the power of artificial intelligence, it's really having enough data that's actually being taken to put into a computer algorithm to make those particular predictions or assessments. So when you actually think about the row crop industry in the United States, they take a huge amount of data. In the specialty crop arena, floriculture or horticulture in the greenhouse industry, for example, I don't really think, in my personal opinion, that we've even come close to generating the amount of data that's actually going to be needed in order to have artificial intelligence make those rapid impacts within the industry. So with that said, I think there's going to be opportunities across the spectrum for data sharing in order to generate robust data sets that can be used for that predictability. So if you can imagine sharing data across industries, whether it's the application of environmental controls to modeling of crop production systems. The data that you generate in your own particular operation is probably not going to be enough to build that robust model. You're going to actually try to share that data across the industry in order to make those particular predictions. When we talk about the automation, it's really going to increase the efficiency. I know in your operations, most of you are probably feeling the pain of the very small labor pool that's present right now, and the fact that a lot of the industries across the spectrum are having a hard time finding labor. increasing that efficiency in your operation through AI, computer technologies, imaging, etc., will allow you to make broader impacts with a much smaller labor pool. But on the flip side of that, that labor pool that you have is going to have to be a lot more specialized and have a lot more advanced training in order to be able to manage those computer systems. So one of the videos that I actually found on the internet that kind of describes the application of a little robotics as far as the industry is a YouTube video that I'll call up right now, and we can actually watch it for about a minute or so. Okay, so you just watched the video of some robotics application to sticking cuttings, which I'm sure all of you do on a regular basis, but there were a lot of things happening in that video. Not only the robotics part of the application where the arm came in and it had to be programmed to grab the cutting at the right angle, to lift it up, to orient it, and then an arm swung out and stuck it. So it had to be programmed as far as the depth it put into the tray and also the logistics of the tray and where each one of the holes were. So a lot of that would have to go into the computer programming. But also, I hope you noticed that along that conveyor, when somebody threw the cuttings onto the conveyor, that it jumped every now and then, and it jumped to reshuffle the cuttings that were actually on that conveyor. So the actual imaging or the camera on the top could successfully look at each one of those cuttings to give data back to the robotic arm in order to make the grab at the right angle and at the right strength and to actually put it into the actual tray there. So when we talk about artificial intelligence, it goes much more beyond that robotic arm. It's a lot of the programming, it's a lot of the imaging that feeds data back to the computer algorithm. So it can actually resemble an artificial hand or a human hand that would go grab that cutting and actually stick it into the tray there. So, this is technology that's actually hitting the market, or it's probably maybe in some of your operations right away. So it it's just a little bit of the artificial intelligence that is going to hit this industry, but it just shows a really good demonstration of how a lot of this, kind of interdisciplinary work is going to go into the applications of some of this technology to your operations. Okay, so the rest of the talk is going to be centered around four different main areas that I see as some of the potential future applications of artificial intelligence to the floriculture industry. We'll talk about plant development or plant breeding. Then we're going to talk about plant design and selection. And then there we'll bring in some of the big data science that I've mentioned previously. Then we'll talk about the applications to plant maintenance, or when we talk about maybe pest management or just plant care. And then lastly, I'll talk a little bit about what we're calling virtual reality or augmented reality. And I'll show you kind of how that's being applied and certainly what are some of the applications, especially to the educational aspects of horticulture and floriculture in general. So when we talk about artificial intelligence and plant breeding or plant development, this is really what's hitting the universities and certainly what's hitting the big ag industries right now. So when we talk about these applications, what we're really talking about is using artificial intelligence to do rapid phenotyping, because I'm sure all of you are actually aware of the status of, say, molecular genetics or molecular techniques within agriculture and also within horticulture. So if you remember way back when we did genetic transformations, with a gene gun or agrobacterium, and that kind of morphed into what we called QTLs or quantitative trait loci, where researchers would gather phenotypic data by themselves or with humans, and then they would feed back that data into the genetic matrix, and they could actually do predictability as far as which gene combinations were the most important. And now it's moving into the area of just what we call individual phenotyping or rapid phenotyping of individual plants that have already been molecularly characterized, or they've already done the genotyping on that. And I've got two different pictures here on the slide. The one in the upper right hand corner are actually corn genotypes. So this is from Pioneer. And so what Pioneer actually does is they have a corn genotype. They know exactly what the gene configuration is of each one of those plants. And then each one of those plants is in a pot. It's barcoded and it moves around a greenhouse. And during the movement of that greenhouse, it's going under all of these different types of techniques, whether they're cameras or whether they're leaf angle orientation. It's actually taking things like NDVI, maybe it's taking chlorophyll fluorescence, et cetera. And all of those kind of techniques are there to accumulate a huge amount of phenotypic data. And it's in a greenhouse, so they can actually measure that data over the course of growth and development of that corn hybrid. And then they'll be able to actually tie all that information into the yields or the potential predictive yields. So when we talk about the application of artificial intelligence, it's really how that technology can take that rapid phenotypic data and then correlate it back to the genotypic data, which is now becoming very economical and very efficient, even for university researchers, and then how they can use that to make predictability of performance of those particular genotypes. So in essence, what they're doing is they're trying to get the right recipe for these particular plants in order to have the best results, and they can actually tailor that to different environments. And now when you overlay the actual opportunity for gene editing and CRISPR-Cas9, we don't even have to genetically transform plants anymore. We can just turn on and off different pathways or different areas of the DNA strands in order to have different results as far as the application. So it's hitting the row crop arena, the corn, the soybean, et cetera. And then that technology is rapidly moving over to specialty crops, which you all know just has a huge amount of genotypes, a huge amount of variation. And it's really that broad amount of variation that kind of limits us because we don't have, a corn industry or a soybean industry or a cotton industry generating all this data. There's a lot of different types and variation within the industry, which kind of makes it problematic when we actually talk about the genotype and actually characterizing or grabbing those phenotypic data points. So you can imagine maybe in the relatively near future, even within the specialty crop arena and floriculture in general, is that we will be able to use artificial intelligence and the genetic technology that's already present to determine or to identify specific traits, the genes that are involved in those trait expressions, and also even probably specific nucleotides or parts of that DNA that can be used to make accurate predictions of which particular combinations, the right combinations, will make plants more adaptable to this type of environment, whether it's a greenhouse environment under your operations, or once that plant is actually sold to the eventual consumer, whether it's an indoor environment or an outdoor environment, a shade environment, etc. So it's going to take the guesswork out of plant breeding and also plant development, where it's going to be very specific, and it's going to get to the point where we can almost design or tailor make those plants with those right gene combinations in order to ensure adaptability and survivability in some of those particular climates, which is exciting. And this is technology that's here. It's at our fingertips. It's just the applications are falling in line to what sort of industries it's going to touch. The second area that I'd like to talk about real briefly is just artificial intelligence and plant design. So when we talk about plant placement, or whether it's floriculture design or whether it's interior scapes design, so what are some of those impacts that are going to be there? And this really centers on this idea of the impacts that the social media networks and also big data science are already having on the marketplace. And you can think of any type of product that you want to consider. So the old adage is that if you're not paying for a product or an application like on your iPhone, then the product is probably you. And what's actually happening is that the new business model is actually looking at people's activity, people's habits online. What are they buying on Amazon, et cetera? What are they chatting about on Facebook? And then taking that information and then selling it back to the advertisers and the marketers so they can directly market and directly advertise their products to very specific users with very specific needs, and also likes and dislikes, etc. So really, when you're online, every click, every like, every video, every share is actually producing a wealth of marketing data for those advertisers. So how are industries actually going to take advantage of that? A lot of the merchandising industries are already doing this, and it's sort of trickling down into the agriculture sector and certainly the horticultural sector. So in essence, how can we use artificial intelligence and this big data science and these social networks to facilitate maybe plant design, or what plants are going to be going into design in which parts of the country. So just imagine, if you will, if you can kind of look into a predictive future, is that using this technology to build predictive models off of millions of data points of consumer habits or consumer preferences, and then using those purchasing habits, whether they're plants, whether they're landscape, whether they're pots, whether they're steaks, etc., anything that you can think of as far as being a plant related product, and then using very sophisticated data analytics to now take those buying and spending habits and then putting those in the hands of the producers and the marketers of your particular products to target those specific customers for the services and the goods that they actually want. So, in essence, this might cause a rapid shift in things like the interior retail spaces or how you're going to market your particular products. You may not have to use a middle marketing company anymore. With this technology and with this rapid evolving application to these big data analytics, you may be able to go right out to specific consumer groups or specific consumers themselves just based on the data that you're actually going to acquire. So, this is something that, like I said before, this is going to be a very multidisciplinary approach to these applications in our industry. And now, if you can imagine, this is going to bring in the business people, the marketers, the people who are actually going to look at things like the psychology of people spending and some of their habits. What plants do they buy? When do they buy them? It might be to the point where you can get direct information in your particular operation to say, I need to sell this particular plant species at this particular location at this particular time because that's when the consumers are going to be looking for it. It used to be that you could kind of do that in a predictive type of a fashion, maybe weeks to months out, and then you could tailor that to your production cycles. But now this is almost going to be an on demand data or really current, rapid as it's evolving as far as those consumer preferences and those data points. So it's very interesting. And this is going to pull in a lot of people who know how to rapidly analyze very, very large data sets or in databases where they can actually mine for the information that they need. The third area, the big broad area, this is already kind of in the industry, and AI is just really bumping up the technology or making applications a little bit more feasible for specific operations. So when we talk about this idea of plant maintenance or maybe plant culture within your operations, it's already being applied. So you probably have computer control systems for your greenhouse operations, barcoding to assess inventory, what you're producing and what actually is going out as far as a shipment, and then what actually has to need to be replaced. But some of the companies that are entering into this marketplace are using or taking advantage of, say, rapid imaging and how those images could then be used into those big databases and then being used to build these predictive models. So, particular companies have cameras that are mounted on sort of like monorail types of applications in the greenhouse, and they will fly over a crop and they can take images along the way. And those images are then thrown into a computer algorithm, and they can look at the health, the quality of the leaves. They can look at things like the incidence of diseases, or maybe they're seeing some insect populations starting to develop. And then what really ties this into the realm of artificial intelligence, because you could pay somebody to go through your greenhouse and do their scouting, but if you do this electronically through this image analysis, that image is going to go into a computer program. That computer program is going to be able to assess, hey, there's an insect outbreak here because we've actually identified that insect. And then that predictive model is going to say, okay, at this particular point, this is how much a percent outbreak that we have. This is the product that you have to apply, and this is how you're actually going to apply it. And now, if we kind of look at the rapid evolution of a fully automated industry, that information could go to a robotics type of an application that would then go into a greenhouse bag, go to that specific area, and then target that pest population with an application or a spray. And that's what you see in the upper right hand corner. There's also the application of drones. Drones are being used in outdoor production areas to do the same thing as far as a rapid assessment of the status or the quality of the crop as it's actually grown. And they can actually fly these things in very large types of greenhouses, do the very same thing as that camera that would be on that monorail. That imaging technology can also be tied into, say, lighting systems, watering systems, misting systems, etc. So it's really taking technology that are already present in your particular operations and tying them into a central computer system with that then would be able to make decisions and make those predictive models. So when we talk about the advent of machine learning, we're really talking about taking that data, feeding it into a computer system, and then having that computer system learn what the data is being generated, and then to be able to make an application in that particular arena. So we're not moving into the realm of, say, robots taking over the replace of all, taking the place of all the humans actually in the operation, but we're really trying to make use of the data and certainly the data collecting capabilities in order to feed information into that those particular models. And like I said before in the first part of the presentation, it's really the more data that you can generate, the more that goes into the model, the better your predictive abilities are going to be. So when you think you have enough data, you can always use more in order to make some really good assessments and give you the tools that you need to manage your operation. So in my mind, when we talk about specialty crop production, whether it's floriculture or other types of arenas, it's really how are we going to be able to generate the amount of data that can go into a model that now becomes a very viable and very robust way to make those predictive analytics. Here's another example real quickly of, say, a camera that could be mounted that could actually monitor specific crops. That camera or that computer system could be programmed to identify and rapidly identify, say, a disease or a disease condition. And once it sees that in the operation, it can assess the percent of the spread or the percent of the disease that's in your particular crop or in your particular area of the greenhouse. And then, like I said before, it can tell you what it is. It can also tell you the causes, the controls, and probably some possible concerns. Now, one of the things I shared in previous presentations for this particular topic is the fact that when we talk about the application of AI and we talk about this idea of using machine learning to make predictive decisions within your operations, it's never going to replace the human factor. It's never going to replace that experience. And what it's actually doing, in my mind, is it's really allowing new people to come into the marketplace who don't have 20 or 30 years worth of experience with particular crops, whether they're floriculture, whether they're greenhouse, etc. And it's allowing them to make uh, entrance into that marketplace and rely on technology to kind of make up for those years of experience that most of you already have and that you've used to build a very successful operation. So if you look around the country, some of the success stories that you might have seen in the media where people go and they build huge greenhouse operations, whether they're in urban areas or they're in peri-urban areas. If you dig a little bit deeper and you see some of the CEOs for these big operations, they can bring the venture capitalists along in order to facilitate the production or facilitate the operation or the emergence of that operation, but they're really coming from backgrounds as far as business and marketing and also computer programming and maybe even some environmental controls. So they don't really have that greenhouse experience that most of us got in our education or as we were growing up in the industry, but rapid use of artificial intelligence and big data analytics is allowing them to get into the marketplace, which could cause some competition among the more established markets. But as good as AI could be, or we think it's going to be, it will never replace human experience or the amount of experience that you guys have in your operations. What's really going to set people apart is how you can make advantage or take advantage of some of these technologies to make your operations even better and more successful. And then the last area that I'd like to talk to, which is really exciting for us as educators, especially at the universities, is actually using things like virtual reality and augmented reality to facilitate not only crop management, but also educational opportunities. So there are a couple of a couple of companies that are actually in the marketplace right now. Plant Vision is one of them, and they're using this virtual reality. They can make a platform for your iPad or your iPhone, and they can have an adaptive imaging that will go right onto your iPhone. And there they can use different types of measurements as either infrared or UV as two examples that I have here for this particular tomato crop. And again, it's really using the data analytics and those computer algorithms that are all behind that imaging, and it's going to show that particular manager what is going to be needed to be done in real time. And then that virtual reality aspect of it is looking at that predictive analytics to let that producing manager know that, okay, well, I'm taking an image of this particular tomato crop now. That particular tomato crop is going to have to be shipped within 3 or 4 days. Is it actually going to be ready? So there's a lot of different predictive tools that they can put onto that platform that really allows that manager to make those decisions a lot quicker with just a snap of their iPhone. And then, oh, by the way, every piece of data that it collects gets archived and then used in that particular operation or crop or in the next subsequent crops that are actually there. So this is really exciting. Some of the applications, especially for education, when we talk about maybe extension or actual classroom education or lab education, is using virtual and augmented reality to let people experience a greenhouse operation or a production cycle without actually being there. And if we've learned one thing over the past year and a half with this with COVID environment is that we can do a lot of things very successfully remotely. Okay, we can share information via Zoom like we're doing right now. We can also get groups together to collaborate when we're in different parts of the country. But we can also use this emerging technology to educate, whether they're growers through extension activities or students at the universities or at the high schools, on how these particular systems work or how they can all actually be integrated together in order to make those decisions that are actually there. So with your phone or with your iPad, you can get a lot of information right in your screen, and that information can be there to help make decisions on the fly. But we can also use this technology, is very interesting, is that you can actually use it in maybe type lab types of endeavors where people can actually get the feeling of doing a tissue culture type of an operation, or a potting type, or maybe a propagation, maybe a grafting type of an operation, and doing that remotely wherever they are, in the United States or all around the world. But they can use it, do it via those virtual reality types of applications. The other thing that will actually allow it to do, and when we talk about it trickling down to possibly the consumer, is that consumer could take a program and they could download it to their phone or to their iPad, and they can go to a botanical garden or they could go to your operation and they could scan your particular products, and then they will get rapid information from each one of those products that are now scanned into that virtual reality type of a network. So in essence, it could tell, identify plants rapidly. It could tell, what particular environments they're going to be successful at. And if you can imagine how powerful this would be to sell your products in a commercial setting, or even sort of like a wholesale setting, where somebody could just take an image and all the information about that particular product, its applications, its needs, its cultural characteristics that are be required for its successful adaptation, are going to be right there at their fingertips. And they could imagine diving deeper into each one of these different species and learning a little bit more about that, and then increasing the knowledge, increasing the interest, which then increase the marketing and certainly the bottom line for your particular operations. But one thing when we talk about the applications of VR, we're really excited about that in the educational realms, because we now know that we can put information and we can put techniques in the hands of students who don't even have to be on campus. Now, like I said before, there's going to be no substitute for the real thing, but this is going to be technology that's going to take us as close as we've ever been able to do that before. Okay, so in conclusion, I hope you enjoyed this presentation, because it's just a kind of a broad overview of some pretty interesting and rapidly evolving areas of the applications of artificial intelligence within the floriculture industry. So whether we talk about smart tech, which we all have at our fingertips in our smartphones, or we talk about this idea of actual big data science or social networks, they're already impacting our lives, and how they're going to trickle down to make some really serious impacts in our operations and certainly our industries is going to be exciting to actually watch. So when we talk about this idea of looking at research and teaching and extension or outreach, we're really trying to do our best to bring artificial intelligence to those aspects of the university. We have huge initiatives right now across the country and a lot of the major universities of looking at ways that we can actually make artificial intelligence more adaptable, and basically train those students who are going to enter into your industry to have the tools that they need to make you and your operation successful. So I hope you got a little bit of appreciation of some of the possible applications to horticulture and floriculture, especially. And just know that these rapid technology developments are here, and they're going to bring a lot more opportunities for you to bring in artificial intelligence into your operations. But remember that when you do that, you might gonna have to find some students or some labor pools who have grown up with that technology or can actually help implement that technology into your particular operations, because it's going to go beyond just a programming for maybe a current computer or environmental control system that you have in your greenhouse. This whole idea of tying in these predictive analytics, or looking at database management and how we can use those tools in order to be successful at our marketing, our operations, and our production aspects, it's going to bring a much different worker and much different skills to the marketplace that you currently have. So in short, expect some very interesting things for the future in horticulture. And, just in a nutshell, get ready for some very exciting changes. And one thing, if you already know about rapid technological advancement, is once we're there, it's going to bring the price point down to the point where everybody can actually use that and adopt that into the marketplace. So in conclusion, what I'd really like to do is just acknowledge some of the people who helped in the formation of this presentation. Specifically UF IFAS for certainly asking me to present this at the extension symposium that we held last summer, and FNGLA, who encouraged me to put the presentation together for the TPIE that was actually held last January. And then lastly, I'd really like to acknowledge Wayne and Max Mercer for sponsoring this particular webinar. Wayne and Max have been really great to work with, and Max is actually an alumnus of our department, so we're really proud of everything that they're doing in their operation, and they certainly have a very bright future in the marketplace. Then lastly, I'd like to really remind you of some of the upcoming webinars that are going to be happening in the next couple of weeks. Got some exciting topics that are actually on the horizon, so I hope that you join in and participate as much as you can. Thank you.
Dean, thank you for your presentation. This was extremely informational. And now I would like to open up for the session of question and answer. You can put your questions either in the Q&A feature or in the chat. So I have a question here in the intern. Part of artificial intelligence deal with machine learning. How will you define what machine learning is and what impact could it possibly have in the floriculture industry, Dean?
Well, thank you for that first question there, Melissa. And I think when you look at artificial intelligence, machine learning is just one part of this whole idea of artificial intelligence. And machine learning just goes to the realm of taking data and having that data fed into a computer algorithm, and then allowing that computer to use that data in order to make predictions in and of itself. So it's not necessarily, like I said before, computers taking over the world, but this is just a way to have computers make those decisions in operations, especially in floriculture. So the people online probably have a computer control system that will do environmental controls in their operations. Imagine taking that computer system, tying it into, say, a NOAA database of weather or weather characteristics, and then having that computer system learn, when a storm is approaching, what does it need to do prior to that storm approaching? Instead of relying on a program that was built by somebody years ago in an office somewhere to say, okay, if then this, then that particular machine learning would allow that computer to make decisions almost as far as what's going to happen. If the wind speed picks up to a certain percent, do they close the draft louvers on the greenhouse versus, having a program just say, okay, at this point in the day, lift them up maybe 30% or 40%. That machine learning could use data already accumulated and then make those predictions on the fly. And that, looking at a control system, that's just one example of how, industries are going to be able to take advantage of it.
Thank you very much. I see we have one question here in the Q&A by Kevin Lutz. Are you seeing artificial intelligence / ML models that are used to define the optimal greenhouse growth formulas to optimize quality and yield?
That's a great question. I think that they're probably being built. I don't know of very specific examples, but I know if we can take lessons from the agronomic industries, that's exactly what they're doing there. They're having the amount of data accumulating, be able to do that. And when you look at, say, that the picture I showed of the corn that's going through that greenhouse, at each one of the steps, that phenotypic data is being collected. And when I say being collected, it's thousands of data points on a particular plant, whether it's leaf angle, growth speed, relative growth index, NDVI, things like the pigmentation, et cetera, flowering characteristics. And all of that goes into those predictive models. And like I said in the presentation, I think the challenge for the floriculture industry is just the sheer amount of variation and the sheer amount of species that are grown, even in a single operation, much less the entire industry, and how the industry can actually take enough data in order to be, kind of assured that they have a robust data set in order to have that model being predictive. So I think, again, as the price point goes down in this technology, then it's going to be more adopted. And even in my brief career in academia, I've seen this with molecular technologies. In grad school, we saw the technologies emerging, And we saw that they were so out of reach for, an individual principal investigator at a university that they had to kind of wait until more people adopted that technology, to where now we can set up a fully molecular lab for a fraction of what it cost 20 years ago. And that just even helps the technology even advance further.
Thank you. Uh, I have another question over here. How could digital imaging impact the floriculture production industry? And what impacts could it have on pest management, for example?
I think this whole idea of using this digital imaging analysis is going to be very exciting, because when you take a camera and you take a picture, that picture can be analyzed in many different ways. So when we talk about the applications of floriculture, not only can we look at things like growth habit, leaf angle, like I mentioned before, but we can now dig even deeper into looking at maybe floral colors or leaf shapes, leaf angles, leaf variegations. And when we talk about using that, it can help out with the production cycles of it. But I think if you take that imaging and you can apply it to something like pest management, if that slide that I showed of the camera that went across that rail and would be able to take images of that operation, well, if it takes an image and it identifies an insect that might be on a leaf of one plant, it can take the image of that insect, compare it to a database that it has in the background, and say, aha, it's probably maybe an aphid, or it's probably maybe a thrip if it gets that high amount of resolution. And then what it can do is it can take that image, compare it to all the other images it took in that bay, and say, okay, we've got a 10% outbreak, or there's a 10% incidence of this particular insect. Once it gets to a threshold, which is already pre-programmed there, okay, if it gets to 12 or 13%, then we got to worry. And then, okay, now we have to have those pest management applications take place. So I think when you talk about, a picture is worth 1,000 words, well, I think you can imagine a picture or a data or an image captured in operation could give you 1,000 data points. And those data points could then go into whatever sort of information that you'd want to collect, whether it's disease management, insect management, the growth habits of your particular crop. Maybe you made an application of a fertilizer and now you want to see how fast those crops are growing. If you have an image that's taken periodically during the day over consecutive days, you can actually build in a predictive growth rate based on whatever sort of application that you have done, whether it's an irrigation or a fertilizer or even a pesticide.
Yeah, I find that very useful because I work with disease management, and sometimes for our human being, we can be biased, looking into certain things in the crops, and that will be a very useful and unbiased use of
Mhm.
artificial intelligence.
That's a great explanation of how it can actually be applied. And I think that, in doing research for this presentation, I came across a particular company, and they were in Japan, and they were selling an app for an iPhone that people could take pictures of the plants on their patio, and then that picture could be sent back to the company, and it could predictably assess, okay, is it a disease, is it a fertility application, etc. And then that information will be sent back to the user and say, okay, you need to buy this particular chemical. Oh, by the way, you can go 3 or 4 miles to XYZ and buy it and bring it back, and it'll actually give them step-by-step instructions on how to actually apply it. So it's in the hands of the homeowners now, which means that, once it gets into the industry, it's going to even be more robust and be even more powerful.
All right, one more question here. Most people think of robotics when they hear artificial intelligence. What do you see as positive impacts of robotics in the industry, and what could be some potential negatives of robotics?
Okay, the way that I see robotics and certainly how they can impact the floriculture industry, I think that you can look at positives and you can look at negatives. And all of these revolve around this whole idea of the labor force. So when you think about robotics, you're thinking about the efficiency. You can put a machine out to do what a human would. You can program that machine. You can buy it once, so you don't have to pay it hourly to do what it needs to do. And right now, the technology where the robotics can do applications, they can do assessments, they can do imaging, they can actually even do pruning. So there's some examples of robots that actually go into maybe a, a grape orchard and make the corrective pruning as it needs to be done. But so that would be kind of like the positive aspects of it. It could increase the efficiency of your operation, and then you don't have to rely on that labor force anymore to do that manually. I think the flip side of that, when you think about some of the problematic aspects of robotics, is that it takes away from, the amount of people that you're going to need in your operation, and certainly the specialization of those workers. So when you think about, okay, if in hiring 40 workers to do particular tasks in the greenhouse, if you automate and go to robotics, maybe you only have to hire 10. somebody to monitor those robotics, but then you have to almost, imagine hiring a mechanic, a computer programmer, and maybe even somebody who could troubleshoot that particular program for that robot, because once the robot goes down, then you're out of business. So it's going to have a real impact on labor, increasing the efficiency. But as it does that, the people that you have in your operation are going to have to be even more knowledgeable, more specialized, and even more trained in order to carry out tasks that we wouldn't really associate with with a greenhouse operation, as far as maybe pruning or moving plants and pots around, to making fertilizer or pesticide applications, to now somebody you could actually do troubleshooting of computers and and programs, and even some of the mechanical aspects of robotics.
All right. And I have another question here. If artificial intelligence involves robotics, this is also about robotics, imaging, and computer programming, will this change the workforce of the industry? And I think you basically
Yeah, I answered that question. I think if I could add anything further, I think, what we're seeing across the universities is that this whole idea of artificial intelligence is kind of just one of many things that are going to bring so much into what we call interdisciplinary knowledge bases or interdisciplinary training of students. So I think gone are the days when you're going to go to a department and you're going to learn what's, behind the science of your particular department. So we strongly encourage students to do that, and we're building academic programs to put in more interdisciplinary experience, or more interdisciplinary approaches to problem solving. Some of the initiatives that we have in my university here at the University of Florida is looking at, when people think about artificial intelligence, maybe think computer science or engineering. Well, it goes even beyond that, because now we're going to bring in the plant breeders, we're going to bring in the plant pathologists, we're going to bring in the entomologists, because they're the ones who are actually going to apply the science. So everything that goes beyond the scenes are kind of the built environment, and then there's the application environment. And we're going to have to train students in order to do that. So I think it's going to have an impact on the industry, and it's going to trickle down to who those industries are actually going to recruit to their operations. And another thing, if I have a second here to describe it, is that when we look at maybe social media, or looking at all this big data that's sitting out there in the marketing on Facebook, on Amazon, et cetera, you're gonna have to hire a specialized type of person to go into those databases and mine those databases for the information that you need in order to predictively market and sell your products. And where do they need to go, when do they need to go, and who wants them, and who wants them now. And that's going to be the big thing. So gone are the days of maybe going to the horticulture sciences department, and I'm sorry to say this, is hiring somebody who's got a really firm training in horticulture and everything that they know about that horticulture, where those industries are going to go over to computer science, or they're going to go into the business arenas where those students have been trained to do that, and they're going to add a really interesting dynamic to the operations that are across the industry.
Thank you, Dean, very much. And thank you all for joining us today for another session of the AFE Grow Pro webinar series. We encourage you to view our full calendar at endowment.org/Grow Pro in the link provided in the chat. And while you are there, check out the grower-related resources and the research reports available to you for free. Thank you, thanks to the industry support. Our next webinar will be heat delay in poinsettias on August 24th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And we ask you to please complete the brief survey about today's sessions. Your feedback will be very helpful for us to continue improving the monthly webinars and provide additional topics of importance for you. Thanks for joining us today, and we hope you all have a great day.